It was a quiet, crisp evening, and the moon hung heavy in the sky. The wind whispered through the trees outside, a sound that would have been calming if it weren't for the unease creeping through the house. Inside, the home was warm, the soft glow of lamps casting long shadows on the walls. A little boy, no more than 7, sat in the living room, his eyes wide and restless. His parents were gone, off to some gathering they'd insisted he didn't need to attend, and in their place was the babysitter, an old man with unsettlingly sharp eyes and skin so tight against his bones, it seemed as if it might tear at any moment. The boy's name was Charlie, and he had been a handful all evening. His parents had warned the sitter, old Mr. Porter, that he was a bit of a troublemaker, but Mr. Porter simply nodded, his cracked lips curling into what might have been a smile. The man didn't seem bothered by the chaos that Charlie created. Crayons were strewn across the carpet. A bowl of popcorn lay spilled in the corner of the room, its contents forgotten and scattered. The walls of the living room bore the marks of a hastily thrown pillow, and the couch cushions were overturned. Charlie didn't mind making a mess. It made him feel powerful. His parents weren't around to scold him, and this old man? He didn't seem to care about the disarray at all. He just sat in his chair, his ancient body nearly swallowed up by its faded fabric, his thin fingers trembling occasionally as he adjusted his glasses, peering over them at Charlie with unsettling attention. Charlie tried to get a rise out of him. He jumped on the couch, kicked over a lamp, and shouted loudly to see if it would spark any reaction. But Mr. Porter just sat there, unblinking. He didn't flinch at the noise. He didn't even move. Finally, Charlie huffed and threw himself onto the floor, pouting. "Why don't you say something? Don't you care?" "All things have their time, child," Mr. Porter murmured, his voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "All things." The clock on the wall ticked on, and the house seemed to hold its breath. The boy's eyelids grew heavy, and for a moment, he considered just curling up in his blanket and going to sleep. But no, there was still too much energy left inside him, too much to prove. Then the grandfather clock in the hall struck 12. Mr. Porter's head jerked up sharply, his eyes gleaming with a strange, dark intent. The stillness of the room was shattered by the low, menacing sound of his voice. "Charlie," he said, his voice suddenly deep, guttural. "Shall we play a game?" Charlie blinked, his eyes suddenly wide with unease. There was something wrong about the way Mr. Porter spoke, something off, but he didn't have time to question it before the old man continued. "Hide and seek," Mr. Porter said, his grin stretching impossibly wide, the corners of his mouth cracking at the strain. "I'll count. You hide. If you win, you get to live. If you lose..." He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung in the air, cold and oppressive. Charlie's heart raced. He wasn't stupid. He had seen the old man's thin, leathery skin. He had noticed the strange, almost unnatural way the man moved, as if his joints creaked under too much pressure. And the eyes, those eyes, always watching, always waiting. But there was no time to hesitate. The game had begun. Mr. Porter raised a trembling hand and began to count, his voice growing louder and more distorted with each number. 1, 2, 3. Charlie scrambled to his feet. His pulse hammered in his chest as he scanned the room for a place to hide. There was no way he was going to let this old man win. He ran across the living room, darting toward the staircase. 4, 5, 6. Mr. Porter continued counting, the words growing heavier, more sinister. Charlie's mind raced. The attic. The attic was the perfect place. No one would think to look there. His breath quickened as he tore up the stairs, his feet slapping against the wooden steps. He reached the door to the attic and shoved it open with his shoulder. The smell of dust and old wood hit him in the face as he climbed inside. The attic was cramped and dim, the only light coming from a small window at the far end. Charlie scrambled for a corner, hoping to disappear into the shadows. He held his breath, his small body tense as he crouched low, praying Mr. Porter wouldn't find him. Downstairs, Mr. Porter's voice echoed in the silence. 7, 8, 9. Charlie's heart hammered in his ears, but the old man didn't come. There was only the soft creak of the house settling, the whisper of the wind outside. It seemed like forever before Mr. Porter's voice faded, replaced by the sound of heavy footsteps moving through the house, slow and deliberate. Then, suddenly, there was a sound, a loud crash. Charlie's heart skipped a beat as he turned in the corner of the attic. A pile of old boxes had tipped over, sending a shower of dust and debris tumbling to the floor below. His stomach dropped. The old man would hear that. He held his breath, hoping against hope that Mr. Porter hadn't noticed. But the footsteps stopped. The silence stretched. And then, bang! The door to the attic rattled violently, as if something, or someone, was trying to break through. Charlie's eyes widened in horror. He backed further into the shadows, trying to shrink into the darkness. The banging grew louder, more frantic, as Mr. Porter began to pound on the door, his body groaning with the effort. "Charlie," the old man's voice croaked. "Charlie, I can smell you. You can't hide forever. It's time for you to come out now." Charlie's breath caught in his throat. His nails dug into the floor as he gripped the rough wood, trying to steady himself. His skin felt clammy, his body trembling from fear. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't make a sound. The pounding intensified. Each blow to the door seemed to shake the walls of the attic. Charlie could feel the vibrations under his fingertips. His mind screamed, begging him to move, to do something, anything, but his body wouldn't respond. And then, with one final deafening crack, the door splintered wide open. Mr. Porter's long, thin arm snaked through the hole, its length impossible, its reach horrifying. The claw, gripped the edge of the door frame, and with a terrible screech, the rest of his body followed. His face appeared next, a mask of hunger and malice, his skin stretched tight over his bones, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Charlie screamed, his voice high-pitched and frantic, but it did him no good. Mr. Porter's bony fingers curled around his ankle, and before Charlie could even react, the old man pulled him toward the door. He kicked and clawed at the floor, his fingers scraping against the wood as he was dragged, inch by inch, toward the entrance. His nails cracked, breaking as they scraped the surface. The pain was unbearable, but it was nothing compared to the terror that surged through him when Mr. Porter's long, thin arm slid into the attic, wrapping around him like a vice. "No, no!" Charlie screamed, tears streaming down his face as he fought with every ounce of strength he had left. But it was useless. Mr. Porter's grip was unyielding. With one final monstrous tug, the old man yanked Charlie from his hiding place, pulling him out into the open. Charlie's legs kicked, his body twisting in a futile attempt to break free. But the old man's hold was too strong. Then, as if in slow motion, Charlie was lifted high into the air, his small body dangling in the grip of that twisted, skeletal hand. He was suspended for a moment, helpless, before Mr. Porter's jaw unhinged with a sickening crack. and then the world went black. The last thing Charlie heard was the sound of the old man's footsteps, heavy and deliberate, echoing across the floor. His laughter followed, a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to shake the very walls. Ha, 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 and then nothing. In the cold autumn night, the house fell silent once more. The wind continued to howl outside, but inside there was only the sound of heavy feet, moving slowly across the wood floors. Mr. Porter's laughter faded into the distance as he walked away, leaving behind only darkness and the bitter memory of a game that no one would ever win.